Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5, and it's time for our mayoral talk. I've got the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, Matthew Dickerson, on the line, and hopefully it'll be a better recording than what we did yesterday for Tech Talk. G'day, Matthew.
Good morning, Tony. Thank you for having me along, and it's always good to be able to share lots of information from council meetings with you and your listeners.
Yeah, I should mention, we're talking about a number of topics today as a result of last night's full council meeting, of course. And there's always interesting things that come out of that and things which are very pertinent to Wellington. So the first topic we've got here is what's happening with Spices Creek, the renewable energy framework that you're trying to develop, which is a wind farm with 107 turbines, and you're looking for community benefits here. And I think you've got some exciting news there by the sounds of it.
I think we're going really well. I can't say it's signed off yet. At the moment, this is out on public display, so people can have a look at it and make comment about it. But one of the things that's a real challenge, I believe, for council and in particular around the Wellington area is that we've got all these exciting opportunities with renewable energy projects. And we're going to be providing, when I say we, the community around that Wellington area is going to be providing a lot of power for the state. Liddell Power Station closes down today. That's another coal-fired power station closing down. So we need to provide power in other ways. One of the real focal points for this council is to make sure that the community gains benefit out of being the providers of all this power. And so one of the things that we've done is in a previous meeting, it goes back a few months now, we created a framework because, believe it or not, the state government has no standard framework for community funds from any renewable energy project. If it's a wind farm, they say there's got to be some agreement in place, but there's no parameters around what that agreement looks like. If it's a solar farm, there doesn't have to be any agreement in place at all, and the same with a battery. We've created a framework where we've said we believe we should, as a community, we should receive 1.5% of the total value of that project, so the total capital invested in that project initially. So if it's a $1 billion project, for example, we believe we, the community, should receive $15 million of that. And the way that comes out is over a life of the project. So say it's a 30-year project, you might receive, in that example I gave, a $1 billion project, take that $15 million, divide it by 30, gives you $500,000. So in year one, the community receives $500,000 and then it's indexed throughout the life of the project. Now that 1.5% is the first time there's really been any set framework to go forward with. And we've actually been contacted by councils, several councils from across the nation to say, can we have a look at your framework, please? Because we want to try and do that with some of the renewable energy projects in their area. So that's all good to have the framework, Tony, but then you need to get to the point where the rubber hits the ground. And the first one we've got is the Spices Creek wind farm that you mentioned. 107 turbines, 97 of those are in the Dubbo Regional Local Government Area and 10 of those are in the Warrumbungle Local Government Area. So we've said to the proponents of this particular wind farm, this is what we'd like, here's our framework, we want you to consider this, and we negotiate back and forth. And we've actually had a very good hearing from the proponents in this case, and they've agreed in principle to it at the moment, Tony. Now, it's still got to go out for public exhibition, so it went through council last night to do that. And there's parameters around that in terms of how wide an area, how big an area can it go in. So, for example, do you want some of that money spent in the CBD of Dubbo? Well, that doesn't seem fair, so let's exclude that. So we wanted a wide enough radius that it could cover Wellington and the areas around Wellington, but not go so far as Dubbo. We just think it's fair and reasonable the money is spent in Wellington and in the Wellington area. So we're talking about approximately 20-kilometre radius around Spices Creek and including, in addition to, the Wellington CBD or the Wellington area, the township, if you like, as well. And so that means projects that have value, that have some sort of viability to improve Wellington are certainly on the cards, and projects to improve the roads around there as well. Now, it's very specific that it's not the roadworks that they've got to do to deliver the project. There'll be certain roadworks they'll have to do as part of that application that will have to be developed for them to be able to bring wind turbines down those roads. So it's not money to be spent on those roads. But roads in the surrounding area, that would be okay. There'll also be a part of that will just be for the community benefit fund for applications from the community as well. So a certain percentage of that will be for that sort of work as well. So big picture strategic projects, small projects for small community groups, all of that will be covered in that. So it'll be pretty exciting if we get this through and really set a precedent for the rest of the nation.
Yeah, that does sound pretty good, Matthew. And in particular, I mean, we know that the road network, the rural road networks, are in poor shape, and councils are responsible for a lot of that, unfortunately, these days. And this will probably help do something about that, and that's to the benefit of the whole economy in the LGA, I might add. So that's a good step forward, I think.
That's right, and we want to make sure we're not just replacing the responsibilities of state government and local government with the road maintenance they would have to do anyway. So yeah. I think good so far, and we keep looking at this one and the next one and the next one. Once we get a few of these projects up and running, and they don't start paying until they start the construction phase, so it means no money comes out while the planning process is in place. Once construction starts, that's when the next financial year after construction starts is when that money starts coming in. But again, if we get a few of these lined up, I think we could generate some really good long-term strategic projects from these out of the Wellington area, which will then be beneficial for evermore. Yeah,
and I think in some cases we might have to start thinking big, when it comes to those sorts of things.
Correct.
And now let's get down to the draft budget. How's that going?
So the draft budget was approved last night for exhibition purposes only, and it's a big budget. You've got hundreds of pages of information to look through there. What typically happens is most people will go and look at things that are relevant to them, and that's fine. And we welcome feedback. We really ask for people to give us feedback around that. One of the things I often ask for in feedback is sometimes people say, can you go and spend some more money on ABC? And that's fine, but we've got to take the money from somewhere. So what I really enjoy when I get submissions around a budget is when people say, can you spend more money on here and you could take it from over there? So it's basically a prioritisation, and that's all this budget is, Tony, all any budget is really. We've got some money and we've got to prioritise where that money goes. We are doing that as councillors, thinking that this is the best use of that money across the entire local government area, but that's where the community comes in. And so as the community looks at that budget, pores over the information, they can look at it right now if they want. They can start sending information through to council about that information. But basically it's a process of prioritisation. What's more important to you in the community? And sometimes people that have got a special interest group or a niche in a community, they might want certain money spent there. And we've got to look at that as councillors and decide the best money being spent, that's the best outcome for the overall community. And that's the real challenge we have.
Yeah, indeed. Now, Jessica Goff, I think Councillor Goff, she made some suggestions about what we do with plaques in parks, and you developed a policy out of that, I believe. So what's happening in that space?
We actually do get requests from time to time for someone to put some park furniture in a park bench, for example, or maybe a plaque in a park, for example, that might commemorate someone that's made a contribution to the community. And we actually have received those requests, but they're always dealt with on an ad hoc basis. We don't really have any set policy on how we deal with those. And so Councillor Goff thought that maybe we need to tidy that up and bring forward a policy that actually sets some parameters around those. So she brought that forward as a notice of motion, and we've now got a draft, which again, this is out on public display as of last night. And so that policy just talks about the type of activities that person might need to have undertaken, the reasons why someone might need to be able to have a plaque or a park bench, just the process in general for that. So I'd ask the community to have a look at that, because I actually quite like the idea of having some commemorative plaques. And I do remember many years ago when I was first on council, one of our fellow councillors died in council, and not in the council building, but died while on council. And so we actually, as a council, we voted to have a park bench named after Bob Thompson was the gentleman's name, so after Bobby Thompson. And so we've got that park bench there over in Victoria Park in Dubbo. But again, that was an ad hoc one-off basis rather than having a set policy. So I do like the idea of this. It's good to have policies around it so that people know the rules before they present it to us. That'll be out on public display. Once we get submissions from the public, that'll come back to council to be formally resolved. And then if people do want to come forward to council, they've then got the policy, they know the rules that are around those memorial plaques and park benches, park furniture in general.
All right. And it looks like it's back to the future in pool management. And from what I have been hearing, I think that's going to be welcome. So what changes are occurring with that?
I'm actually not sure how long Wellington Shire Council had the pool managed internally. You might know that information, Tony. Because
a very long time. Yeah, a long time.
Right,
yeah.
So Dubbo...
About 20 years or more that I've been here, you know.
Right. So Wellington managed their own pool with their own staff, and same with the Geary pool. In Dubbo City Council, we had it for probably 30 years that I know of. It was managed externally. So we had an external contractor. It had come up for tender about every 5 years, and then we'd receive tenders in, and then we'd award it to someone, and they would be the manager of the pool and manage the whole process there with some certain parameters in place.
Matthew, just to be clear, what I meant, what I said was that we had that arrangement here in Wellington for a very long time. It wasn't managed directly so much by the council. It was under the external management regime.
Well, that's interesting because I was told that when the amalgamation occurred, we still had external management of the pool in Dubbo, but I was told that Wellington was managed by Wellington Shire Council at the time of the amalgamation.
Well, I have to check that out because there could have been a few changes, but over the broad period, to my knowledge, it was all external management.
Okay. Oh, well, there you go. So that's slightly different information to what I had. But regardless of that, around about 2018, 2019, that sort of time frame, Dubbo Regional Council, the newly formed council, made the decision to bring all the pools in. Now, again, at that stage, I was told that the Wellington and Geary pools were already internal. Dubbo was external. The decision was made to bring Dubbo internal and manage it from that perspective. And it was difficult for any internal process to occur there because you've got some limitations when council is running a business, and in particular a pool business, which is quite difficult because it's really run for 6 months of the year, and then for 6 months of the year, then it's just in maintenance mode. Now, you can imagine from a council perspective, if you've got full-time staff employed to do that, you've got to find something for them to do for the other 6 months of the year. So we limited the number of full-time staff. We had mostly casuals on, obviously, as you can imagine, during that pool season. But we've just found that it wasn't really working from a management perspective. It was difficult to manage that whole process. Just to add to the complexity, the staff that we employed in that arrangement had to work under the local government award because they were employed by council. And so that was a different award to when an external contractor had the contract. So with all that, and we did discuss this last year when the new council was first elected, Tony, but it was seen as almost too late then to make any changes for the next season. So we said to leave it run for the summer that's just gone, and then we'd look at it again at the end of that summer. We've looked at it again. Councillors have gone through the numbers and have decided that it really wasn't being run as efficiently, as cost effectively as it was run when it was an external process. Now, again, we were more looking at the Dubbo pool there for those numbers because we had the direct comparison. And so the decision has now been made to go back external. So what we're doing is we're asking for proposals from any organisations, and they can be large multinationals, they could be small private organisations. They could be someone that wants to manage all three pools, Dubbo, Wellington and Geary, or they could be three separate companies, or it might be a company that wants to manage Wellington and Geary and another company that wants to manage Dubbo, for example. So basically we were asking for a 5-year period starting from next summer, from the 1st of July 2023 technically, but it would really be next summer. And so basically going for 5 years, and then you could have some extensions on the back of that 5 years for 2 1-year extensions if need be. So essentially we're really putting it out to organisations in the community to tell us how you would manage those pools and do a better job than what's happened in the past. We believe there are many organisations out there that could do this and would want to do this. We'll receive those proposals, we'll then look at those proposals, and then councillors will make a decision as to who wins that process. So the reason we're saying proposals rather than a tender is the process is similar to a tender, but a tender has very defined boundaries, and then we go out and ask for a tender based on that. In this scenario, though, we're really saying we're giving you the flexibility to give us a different idea. There might be ideas out there that we haven't thought of in a different way to manage the pool. So that's the idea, that request for proposal. But again, it's a similar process to a tender where those proposals will come in, councils will make that decision.
Okay, that's very interesting. Now, of course, one of the things that's been on the agenda is the sewage and water harmonisation plan. Council has given a lot of publicity to that. There was a meeting in Wellington at the Wellington Pool just recently. Not many people turned up at all to that. I think the public would probably see what's happening there as a fait accompli. What's the point? But having said that, I think the public should know what's going on with that at least.
So the harmonisation, it's an interesting thing. After the amalgamation, it was compulsory to harmonise or make the same rates between the two old council areas. So rates that were in the same zoned area or the same rating category were different when the two councils were separate. After the amalgamation, a certain number of years were given and they had to be the same, which makes sense. If it's going to be one amalgamated area, it would seem silly to have two different rating structures. So that's already occurred. One of the things that isn't compulsory after an amalgamation is to make the sewerage fees and the water, the cost of water, the same. And so we've discussed that at council and we said, well, it makes sense. The same as rates should be the same. Why is someone in Wellington that turns a tap on paying a different amount for a kilolitre of water as compared to someone who turns on the tap in Dubbo? So it makes sense to have those rates harmonised as well. It's not compulsory. I want to stress that. It's not compulsory from the state government to do this, but it just seems to make sense. It seems like you create these barriers between the old council areas if you don't harmonise them. And what we're trying to do is say, forget about the old council boundaries. We've got one council. How can we all work together? So this is the process there. And there's a few changes there. Probably the most significant change, Tony, is that Dubbo City Council had a flat rate for its water. When you turn the tap on, it didn't matter if it was the first litre that you used or the 10,000th kilolitre that you might use, whatever it was, you paid the same amount for that water. In Wellington, you had a stepped fee, so you paid more for water as you used more, essentially. So you had a first rate at a lower level and then it stepped up to a higher rate. And Dubbo City Council used to have a rate like that, but there was a recommendation from the state government that it just goes to a flat fee. So as best practice, we moved to that. So that'll be a significant change for Wellington. Again, I'd encourage people to look at it, certainly put forward recommendations. I don't think it's a fait accompli in its detail, but I think councillors are fairly committed to harmonising, to making the rates the same between the two old areas. But what they look like and how they're charged and a whole range of variables there, that level of detail, certainly we'd welcome feedback on that. And it's interesting because I did actually have one person who gave me some feedback and said because Dubbo doesn't have fluoride in its water at the moment, they expect to be paying less than people in Wellington because Wellington people have got fluoride in their water. So,
yes. So just to be clear, are you in favour of the flat rates or the progressive rates?
It's interesting, Tony. I actually like the idea of the old tiered rates. And funnily enough, when that was in, I actually had our 4 children were at home, so we had 6 people in our household. So we actually did use a fair bit of water because we had so many people in our household. And some people said to me at the time, it was a disadvantage against large families because you naturally use more water, so you're stepping up into the higher tier. And I took that feedback on board, but that was just the fact of the matter. That was how it worked. When the recommendation came from the state government to have a flat fee, then my logic was, well, there's best practices from the state government and there's obviously a reason they have best practice recommendations, so we probably should take notice of those. So we did change that. So I'm quite happy with the flat fee based on the fact that it's a best practice recommendation from the state government.
And do you think that's what's going to happen there?
That's certainly the intention at this stage, is to go to a flat fee. Again, if lots of people gave us feedback and said, no, we should have a tiered system and here's the reasons why, ignore the recommendation from the state government, here's what it should be, then councils would be open to that idea. Certainly, I don't think councils are set on flat or stepped fees in particular. I think they're really just focused on let's harmonise it, and then how we harmonise it, what it looks like from there, will be up to discussion and debate. But again, because of that best practice, I think councils are leaning that way, but it depends on what feedback we get from the community.
Okay. So it will be interesting from Wellington's perspective as to whether, depending on how much water they use, how it's going to turn out to them.
Yeah, that's right.
So
And it will
they
be
should have a
different.
look at it.
It will be
Yeah.
different. If you're a high water user, then the current system probably isn't as good as a flat fee. But if you're a low water user, it might be better with the current system. So I would encourage people to have a look at it.
Yes. Yeah. Now, getting on to the next topic, the Conservatorium of Music has been a topic of discussion, heated discussion even, in Wellington because of the benefits they're getting from the Dubbo Regional Council, and they're a not-for-profit organisation, and they've got a fairly big turnover, and look, they are an important part of the community for sure. Some people might argue that from an economics perspective, it's a bit of a niche or elite sort of an organisation that gets a lot of money from state governments and elsewhere, but they're expecting to have a council provide them with a building with peppercorn rent and whatever other bells and whistles that might be involved when you've got a host of other not-for-profit community organisations who just get the brush off or they don't get the look in. Very often there's smaller organisations too that have less money. So there seems to be some sort of discord there about the policy in relation to who gets what. And, what brand community organisation are you where you can get something and the other one can't? That seems to be a point of debate at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, and just to pick up one point there, up to this point in time, no money has gone from Dubbo Regional Council or Dubbo City Council to the Macquarie Conservatorium of Music, but a decision was made last night that given their current circumstances where the Department of Education has said to them that we're going to move them out of the current building, they need to find a new home. And it was pointed out last night during the debate and certainly by at least a couple of councillors there that it does seem like it is a cost-shifting exercise. The Department of Education, obviously the state government, has been providing a building for Macquarie Conservatorium at peppercorn rates, so essentially $1 a year or minimal rent. So that's been a good situation for the con up to this point in time. But then moving them out, the Department of Education has not given them any provision for any other building, not given them any additional funding to go and provide a separate building for them. And so they came and knocked on council's door and said, can you please help us? We need to have some way of continuing on providing the excellent services we provide. So council considered that. And all of those points that you mentioned there were all of the points that were discussed during the debate. But the final decision by council, Tony, was to give them a council building. We've got a building that used to be a carpet court building near the theatre, and that building is unoccupied at the moment. So the decision made last night was to give them that building at peppercorn rent. So again, call it rent-free if you will, $1 a year or that sort of money, and then have that security for 5 years with a 5-year option on that. So essentially they could be in that building for 10 years. They'll need to provide their own fit out, so they'll use the funds that they've generated over running their business to do that fit out. And I think that'll be good, Tony. That whole area there, you've got the theatre, you've got people coming around that area, which is basically in the CBD of Dubbo there, and it'll be more activity around that area, and maybe people next to the theatre there will actually take a bit more notice of the Conservatorium of Music. They'll be able to do a fit out that will be state of the art. They've got the funds to be able to do that. They said they'll spend approximately $700,000 on a fit out. So that'll be an excellent fit out there. And I think they can possibly lift the standard. They've got a higher standard already, but lift that standard that they've got there now. I take your point that there are other community organisations out there. And all I would say to those community organisations is that it's open for anyone to make an application to council for any sort of provision. And I guarantee that any application that comes to council will be considered and adjudicated upon on its merits, on the contribution it makes to the community overall and how it contributes to the overall community. I think the con is important for Dubbo. There are lots of organisations that are important for Dubbo, but in this scenario, that's the decision that was made by councillors as a decision to basically support the con and make sure that we've got the con for Dubbo into the long-term future.
Yeah, it's certainly a worthwhile organisation. No one's debating that point. My word of caution would be it's great to get tenure under those sort of circumstances if you're lucky enough to get it as an organisation, but just remember one little thing. One day you might get kicked out.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. But that's any lease arrangement, any rental arrangement, Tony, whether you're paying a peppercorn rent or whether you're paying full rent. There have been many examples over the years that someone might have been in a shopping centre or leasing a particular CBD shop, for example, and the landlord at the end of the lease says we're not renewing it for a myriad of reasons, but you've only got tenure to the end of that lease, haven't you?
That's dead right, yeah. And we've been listening to the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, Matthew Dickerson. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Always my pleasure, Tony. Thank you for your time.
Okay, I look forward to our discussion going forward next month as well.
Thank you, Tony.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.